Greetings. In this video we'll be looking back at the year of 1708 and focusing on the Japan region where two major events took place. A magnitude 8.6 earthquake striking the Nankai Trough, rupturing all 5 segments, and the following month the major volcanic eruption of Mount Fuji. In this video we'll look back at the 1708 major events and also looking at the planetary drivers that were involved, and the interesting aspect is that in the next decade the same planetary drivers are moving to the very similar positions as they did back in 1708, which may be an indication that we could see another major event across Japan, or maybe two, and that is another full rupture of the Nankai Trough, or potentially a Mount Fuji eruption in the decade ahead. Now, I have made a public video regarding the next time frame where a possible Nankai Trough full rupture could be taking place in the 2070s, and that was using 3 solar eclipses in 2070, 2074 and 2075, all foreshadowing a major event to come for the Japan region. But this video will be using astrocartography and looking at the early 1700s and the planetary positions and a foreshadowing of what's to come in the next decade. Now I'm going to show the animation of the planets using astrocartography from 1705 and 1706, and we see some major planetary movements across the region. We get a 3-way connection of Saturn, Neptune and Pluto right over Mount Fuji. The house is marking Mount Fuji, and we can see that Pluto is moving across very slowly, making a series of retrograde stations and loops across the Japan region in the early 1700s. Neptune and also Saturn, their trine and square aspects, are moving across the region and having a series of connections right across the volcano, as well as another zone which marked the exact epicenter of the magnitude 8.6 earthquake that struck in the month prior to the volcanic eruption. So there's a first connection marking the earthquake epicenter. Pluto's moved across screen and is about to station and turn back retrograde. And we're going to see these planets come together again, marking a very significant area of focus across Japan. So the planets that are involved are Pluto making a series of retrograde stations and loops. The harmonic of Saturn and Neptune also featured strongly across the region, and we see the lunar node moving across, squaring with Pluto, now about to merge with the trine of Neptune, and Saturn will be joining the party shortly as well. And that's its square. So this is a very dynamic planetary movements across the region of Japan in 1705 and 1706, and we get to see a convergence of all 3 planets again just to the eastern side of the volcano, and this is right where Pluto makes a station shortly after. Look how powerful the chart is on the left hand side, and a series of planetary stations are taking place also at the same time, and this is the definite foreshadow of the major volcanic eruption as well as the major earthquake event for the Nankai Trough. Just marking the exact station of Pluto, note the position above at 18 degrees. Mars just opposed that, just briefly short of that, but importantly note the station position of Pluto just to the eastern side, very close to the volcano. Now taking a snapshot of the major earthquake and looking at the position of the planets. Late October of 1707, this magnitude 8.8 earthquake struck the Nankai Trough. Now, if we have a look, there's a lot going on in the chart, but importantly, just focusing in on Saturn. Saturn is now merging into the lunar nodes at trine aspect. Now, when a planet moves into a square or trine aspect, it's often a trigger for release. And we can see that the eruption in December of Mount Fuji has Saturn moving into a perfect trine aspect into the south node. So we can see it configured. Saturn was tightening into this position with the first earthquake, and then the major volcanic eruption. Saturn hits this absolutely perfect within 2 minutes of separation of the lunar node. Now looking at some powerful harmonics that are showing themselves late in 1703, noting the position of Jupiter squaring the MCIC, Saturn trining MCIC, which is the midday, midnight position, and on the opposite side we have Mercury doing a square with the MCIC, and a very powerful planetary square of Sun and Uranus. So there's a lot going on with the chart, but importantly the harmonics are showing Jupiter and Saturn featured right across the western side of Mount Fuji in late 1703. Now I'm going to show another animation that previously Neptune and Saturn, their harmonics were moving across with Pluto. This time we're looking at Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto also making a series of connections in between the earthquake epicenter and also Mount Fuji. We can see that Saturn's trine is about to station very close to the house, which is marking the longitude of the major earthquake to come. And we see a stationing Pluto now moving back retrograde. So there's a series of very significant planetary movements, not only with Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto, but they're all making a series of connections early in the 1700s, focus around the Japan region, and we see some very strong dynamics here and strong foreshadowing of what's to come. Now I'm going to show a series of very important planetary aspects across the Japan region and highlighting and colorizing the chart just to emphasize the planetary movements. In 1702, in the month of November, we get a station at Pluto. Pluto's station, its longitude is marking the exact earthquake epicenter perfectly. On the same day, we get a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and a series of very strong planetary harmonics. A T-square marked in red, where we have Sun, Lilith and Mars forming a very strong T-square. And on the opposite side, we get Uranus forming a trine aspect into the same Sun-Lilith configuration. So we get some very interesting dynamics, and it's also connecting into Mars at the same time and the lunar node. We're now looking at May of 1703. This time we get to see Mars forming a connection with Saturn, and we can see it's very close. Now this is just 6 months after the previous station of Pluto. Importantly, if we have a look and expand the chart out slightly, note the position of Mars and also Saturn. Their trine aspects are converging, and we see in the chart they're making a very strong interaction with the MCIC, which is the midday position of the station of Pluto. So we get to see not only a Pluto station marking a future earthquake epicenter, but also the trine aspects of Mars and Saturn when you look at the harmonics added into astrocartography. We're now looking at another powerful chart. This time it involves Jupiter, and it's connecting into the north node perfectly. And if you have a look, it is configured into the MCIC perfectly. And notice right over Mount Fuji. So we get to see Jupiter connecting with the north node right over the volcano. And this is in 1704 in the month of August. Now the previous few frames were showing the foreshadowing for the major earthquake event across Japan. This image we're looking at April of 1706, and this is the major foreshadow for the major volcanic eruption that's about to take place in Mount Fuji. Note that we get a planetary station of Pluto right across the volcano, or just to the eastern flank. Venus is connecting into the north node perfectly at the same time, while connecting at a Yod aspect with Lilith. And we can see that there's a blue triangle, and that is Neptune connecting into the MCIC at the same time of this station of Pluto. We're now looking at another significant chart late December of 1706. Note the position of Uranus forming a T-square with the ascending node of the house, which is marking the Mount Fuji region. We have a near conjunction of Mars and Saturn. Mars is stationing just short of this conjunction. But take a look at the position of Neptune. It's now forming a perfect trine aspect into the MCIC, which is a midday, midnight position, and it's stationing. So there's a very powerful configuration in the month of December of 1706. We're now looking at 2033. Now this is a fair way down the track, but the symmetry is quite amazing. Take a look at the position of Pluto. It's now starting to make its stations, and we'll be moving across the region of Japan. Now the Hōei earthquake of 1707 was in this area that I'm circling with my mouse, and we can see the station of Pluto very nearby. Now just look at the position of Neptune. Neptune at 18 degrees connecting into the MC and also the IC, and this is exactly what happened prior to the Hōei earthquake. This is the fantastic symmetry with Pluto, which is on the opposite side of the dial. It's MC in 1706. This is about a year and a half prior to the major volcanic eruption and earthquake. Look at the position of Pluto above MC, whereas now in 2033 and beyond it will be the IC. Neptune's in the same position, 18 and 19 degrees. So this is an amazing symmetry. So Neptune is massaging the Nankai trough, and we have Pluto coming through to do a series of retrograde stations and loops across the region, exactly what took place in the years preceding this major volcanic eruption for Mount Fuji, and also the major Hōei earthquake, magnitude 8.8 event that occurred for Japan. So this was some amazing symmetry, and we may be starting to see this similar symmetry or a recurrence occur after 2033, and I'll be looking at the Pluto stations in beyond, and I do feel that we could see something very similar to what occurred prior to the major eruption. Just showing the next station of Pluto, note its position. We have some very powerful planetary aspects taking place at this same time. Sun is squaring Saturn, we have Mars squaring Uranus, and we have Jupiter and Saturn at trine with a green wedge of Neptune connecting with the node. So this is extremely powerful, and the station is almost in the exact spot to 1702. I'll now show that. And take a look at this. It's almost in exactly the same spot, and we had a very powerful configuration with a trine of Uranus into Sun and Lilith, and on the opposite side Mars is doing the same thing. So we have very powerful geometries, and we can even see that Neptune is working into 150-degree aspect with the descending node and Venus. So the symmetry is almost identical, and the station is almost in the same spot as 1702. Now I must also mention that we do get a very powerful total solar eclipse in 2035 right across Japan. Importantly, it does intersect the major Okhotsk plate above and also the tectonic boundary of the Japan region and mainland. And importantly, this could be a major driver for future events, and that could be the second half of the 2030s for major movement across Japan. Importantly, it does go just north of Mount Fuji and Tokyo, and it's definitely something to consider as a major foreshadow. Now a brief commentary on the major events across Japan and their movements. We're going to look in December of 2033. Note that we get a major three-way planetary alignment of Venus, Sun, Mercury, forming a T-square into the lunar node. But importantly, look at the position of Neptune. Neptune is stationing at 17 degrees, and that is the key marker that was facilitated prior to the major volcanic eruption and earthquake in the 1700s. And we get to see Neptune hitting that same spot again in 2033. Now looking at 2034 and another interesting time frame. This time we see the emergence of Pluto moving through, making its station very close to the identical position as it did in the year of 1702. So we get to see an interesting dynamic, a very strong series of planetary drivers and geometries at the same time of this station. And Pluto will be starting to have its influence moving across the Japan region and ultimately around the Tokyo region in the years ahead. So this is 2034. So we can see that already we're starting to see similar signs in 2033, 2034, and a solar eclipse of 2035, all foreshadowing of what's to come. We're now moving ahead to October of 2035, and we get to see an amazing chart here, and almost a grand cross, where we see Saturn opposing Pluto. We can see that Jupiter is also opposing Venus, forming a very significant configuration across the Japan region, just to the western side of Mount Fuji and to the eastern side of the earthquake epicenter of 1707. So we get to see a very interesting dynamic, a near grand square of four major planets across the Japan region. We're now moving ahead to August of 2035, and this time Jupiter makes a very powerful square configuration into the MCIC, which is the midnight position. Note that we have a very powerful conjunction of Sun and Venus at the same time. Note the square position is connecting very close to Pluto, and Pluto is about to do its station. So we see some very powerful dynamics in 2035, the year of the solar eclipse, also marking the top end near Noto and the earthquake of 2024, also the major fault above the Okhotsk plate, as well as linking into the solar eclipse, all in the same year of 2035. We're now focusing on May of 2035, and we get to see the emergence of Pluto making its station just to the eastern side, about 65 kilometers away from Mount Fuji to the east, and right over the Tokyo region. Venus is making a connection just after a conjunction with Jupiter. It's now connecting perfectly into the lunar node, trine aspect into the north node, so we get to see a very powerful station of Pluto, marking its influence in the period of 2035. We're now moving into November of 2035, and this marks a very powerful year for the Japan region. This time we get a very significant station of Saturn just to the eastern side of Mount Fuji and pretty much over Tokyo. So we can see a very significant station of Saturn marking the region for a future event, and Pluto is about to be merging across the region as well in the coming year or two. So there's some very significant planetary movements that are already foreshadows, and the Saturn station is another event on top of a series of very strong planetary drivers across the Japan region in the 2030s. We're now moving into November of 2036, and take a look at the chart that we have. Another station of Pluto, this time much closer to Mount Fuji, around 15 kilometers away, again to the east. We get to see a major planetary configuration, almost a series of T-squares involving the lunar node as well as Sun. But importantly, look at the position of Neptune, Mars and Jupiter, forming a very significant trine aspect into each other, and the opposition of Mars and Neptune, which is highly significant. So this is another major planetary station of Pluto, marking a future event potentially for Japan. Now just looking back at 1707 and the main driver and trigger It was definitely Saturn reaching the perfect trine aspect into the south lunar node. We can see that blue triangle in the image, and we're going to use this information to help us project a future time frame where we could see major events across Japan based on the same similar interaction and triggering off. They're going to present three time frames which could be of significance. We're looking at July of 2037, and we get a very powerful configuration of Mars and Neptune while squaring into the lunar node. At the same time, Jupiter is working into a configuration and trine aspect with the ascending and descending node forming a trigger. So that's the first date of note, July of 2037, for a potential event across Japan. The next time frame is January of 2039, which is highly significant. Just looking at this chart and how powerful it is, we see that Mars is conjoining the south node perfectly, and we can see that Saturn is forming a perfect square configuration into both lunar nodes, also squaring Mars at the same time. We have a grand trine in behind between Jupiter, Neptune and Mars while connecting into the lunar node. So this is an unbelievable chart, and this will be potentially the main driver and the key date of focus in 2039. If we look back at 1706 and the planetary position and station of Pluto just to the eastern side of the flank of Mount Fuji, a very significant foreshadowing of what was to come. Importantly, if we have a look at late December of 2029, we get a powerful planetary alignment of Jupiter and Saturn. Now, if we mark with Astrocartography their square aspect, note their position over the exact same position of the Pluto station of 1706. So some interesting dynamics to consider here. We may start to see some very significant movement for Mount Fuji, or even just south into the Nankai Trough in the 2030s. If we look back at the previous time where the Nankai Trough experienced some major earthquake activity, we go back to 1944 and 1946. Both of these quakes were registered magnitude 8.1, and both of these quakes affecting different segments of the Nankai Trough. In 1944, segments C and D ruptured, and 2 years later in 46, segments A and B ruptured. Now, Pluto makes an orbital inverse crossing in 2035, and Neptune hits that same degree node as it did prior to the major volcanic eruption and major quake in 1707. So we get this similar symmetry occurring, foreshadowing events to come for the Japan region, and this time around we get the added influence of the Saturn station just to the eastern side of Mount Fuji itself. That concludes this video presentation regarding the potential for major earthquake or volcanic activity for the Japan region late in the 2030s. Definitely something to consider and to closely monitor. This video is exclusive content for subscribers and members of earthsignals.com. Thanks for watching.